The first detail erased from the case was not a confession. It was evidence. 2 luxury watches were reportedly found inside his pocket. Within hours, that detail disappeared from every major outlet. No correction, no explanation, just absence. In high-profile deaths, facts usually emerge slowly, argued line by line. Here, the opposite occurred. Information did not surface. It was removed. The death itself arrived like a shockwave. It struck in the middle of the night, and by morning, the public conversation had narrowed to a single name. Not because clarity had been achieved, but because confusion had been carefully managed. Official statements contradicted one another. Timelines shifted. Headlines were quietly edited. Then came the silence. Out of that silence, a phrase appeared again and again across digital spaces. The truth is not out. We do not disperse. It was not a slogan crafted by an organization. It was a vow typed by strangers who had never met, bound together by a shared instinct that something essential was being concealed. They remained because the story presented to them felt incomplete. Because a life that burned so brightly could not be extinguished by a conclusion delivered with such haste. One voice cut through the fog more sharply than most. A legal professional based in the capital released a statement that spread rapidly before it was erased. She did not ask for speculation. She did not ask for rumor. She demanded a formal report. A transparent explanation from law enforcement. When a life ends under unresolved circumstances, she wrote, silence from authority is not neutrality. It is complicity with darkness. The public waited for answers. What they received was something else entirely. According to early accounts, the body was discovered after a fall from a high-rise residential complex known for wealth and influence. The narrative was simple. A fall. An end. Yet in the chaotic first hours, fragments of information escaped before they could be gathered back in. Among them was the detail that would become impossible to ignore. 2 watches. One might be personal property. 2 suggest a transaction, or a conflict, or a message not meant to survive daylight. Why would someone preparing to end everything carry objects of such value? Were they his? Or were they proof of an encounter that others did not want examined? The moment that question took shape, it was extinguished. Articles were edited. Screenshots failed to load. Posts vanished without notice. The erasure was so complete that it became more unsettling than any accusation. It confirmed that the detail mattered. Someone wanted the story to remain simple. Someone wanted the public to look away. But erasing a fact does not eliminate it. It transforms curiosity into suspicion. And suspicion, once rooted, does not fade quietly. If that detail truly meant nothing, if it was irrelevant to the truth of what happened, there would have been no reason to erase it so thoroughly, so quickly, and so universally. If that detail did not matter, why did an entire system rush to erase it? In any unexplained death, time is the first witness. It reveals patterns. It allows contradictions to surface. It gives evidence the space to speak. Here, time was not allowed to exist. Before investigators could finish securing the scene, before witness statements could be fully recorded, before any independent forensic report could possibly be completed, an official conclusion arrived. 12 hours after the incident was discovered, authorities announced that criminal involvement had been ruled out. 12 hours. Under standard investigative procedures, that window is barely sufficient to complete preliminary tasks. Surveillance footage from a high-end residential complex alone can require days to collect and review. Digital access logs, elevator records, and entry permissions must be cross-checked. Witnesses must be located, separated, and interviewed. A forensic examination must determine time of death, cause of death, and whether substances or defensive injuries are present. None of these processes occur instantly. Yet the public was told they were complete. What was presented as efficiency was, upon closer examination, administrative finality. The language used was careful. The phrase preliminary investigation appeared prominently. But the conclusion was absolute. Criminality was excluded. The file, for all practical purposes, was closed. Almost simultaneously, an obituary appeared. Not from law enforcement. Not from a verified legal representative. It was issued by an entity that no longer legally existed. Corporate records showed that the studio named in the announcement had been dissolved. It held no standing, no authority. Yet it declared the cause of death as self-inflicted. This act carried weight. Not because it was legitimate, but because it arrived before official forensic confirmation. In cases of disputed deaths, such declarations shape public perception before evidence can challenge them. They narrow the narrative. They suggest inevitability. By labeling the death as a personal decision, responsibility dissolves. Questions become inappropriate. Doubt becomes disrespect. The system favors conclusions that end conversation. The speed itself became the most alarming feature. Forensic pathology does not operate on public relations timelines. Autopsy reports require careful analysis. Toxicology alone can take weeks. A declaration made before those results exist does not reflect confidence. It reflects urgency. Urgency to end something. The absence of a detailed forensic report was not explained. No timeline was provided for its release. No clarification addressed whether an independent examination had been requested or denied. Instead, the public was expected to accept a summary statement and move on. This was not investigation as a search for truth. It was investigation as a procedural formality. The implications were clear. Allowing the process to continue risked uncovering something that could not be contained. Something incompatible with the narrative already chosen. So the narrative arrived first. Not because all questions had been answered, but because they were not meant to be asked. An investigation that had not yet begun was ordered to end. Silence, when imposed, is rarely empty. It is engineered. The first cracks in the official narrative did not come from anonymous accounts or speculative forums. They came from people who knew him. People whose proximity carried weight, whose words could not be dismissed as rumor without effort. A message surfaced briefly from a trusted professional within the industry, a figure who had worked alongside him for years. The language was raw, unfiltered, and deeply revealing. It did not describe despair or resignation. It described filth. It described something rotten. And then it described the end as tragic, in a way that suggested brutality, not choice. Those words mattered because of who spoke them. Not a passerby, not a commentator. A witness to context. Someone who understood the environment he had navigated and the pressures that surrounded him. When such a person chooses language that implies cruelty rather than sadness, it alters the frame entirely. The response was immediate. The post vanished. The account fell silent. Attempts to repost the message failed without explanation. This was not moderation reacting to falsehood. It was erasure reacting to relevance. Soon after, the pattern expanded. Public figures who had posted brief messages of condolence removed them. Some did so voluntarily. Others found their posts no longer visible. Within hours, an entire industry became quiet. The absence was striking. Entertainment circles are not known for restraint. Yet here, restraint arrived uniformly. This was not indifference. It was instruction. As public speech contracted, physical evidence began to surface. Images from the building circulated quietly. The window from which the fall allegedly occurred showed signs of disturbance. The protective screen was not cleanly removed. It appeared torn, damaged. Below it on the outer wall were marks that did not resemble casual contact. They looked like desperation, scratches, irregular, panicked. The kind left by fingers searching for friction against smooth concrete. Such markings do not align with deliberate descent. They suggest resistance, or fear, or a final attempt to remain upright. Beneath that window, the ground changed. Residents reported that the grass below the impact site was removed and replaced days after the incident. Not cleaned, replaced, soil lifted, turf reset. Any remaining impressions erased. This occurred while public debate about the circumstances was still intensifying. Then came the most irreversible act. The body was cremated. In cases where criminal involvement is disputed, cremation eliminates the possibility of re-examination. It removes access to toxicology. It erases internal injuries. It silences what the body might still have revealed. The decision was made swiftly, before independent review could be requested. With physical evidence disappearing, another form of testimony emerged. Audio. Recordings captured by nearby residents began circulating privately. They were imperfect, distorted by distance and urban noise. Yet they shared a common feature, a prolonged scream. Not sudden, not brief, sustained, desperate. Within one recording, another voice could be heard. Calm, detached, uttering words that minimized injury, that trivialized blood. It did not sound like panic. It sounded like control. If the incident was self-inflicted, there would be no plea. No second voice. No struggle preserved in sound. As these recordings spread, calls for professional voice analysis intensified. The question was simple. Was that his voice? And if so, who was the other speaker? Before answers could form, the witnesses vanished again. When those closest to the truth attempted to speak, their voices were removed one by one. As physical evidence vanished and witnesses fell silent, attention shifted toward those who had been present. Not because law enforcement summoned them, but because their own words began to collapse under scrutiny. Public disputes erupted online between individuals known to have attended the gathering that night. Their statements contradicted one another in real time. Timelines did not align. Screenshots appeared, then disappeared. Each attempt to clarify only exposed deeper inconsistencies. One individual presented a digital alibi. Messages were released showing casual plans made during the supposed time window. Yet photographic evidence surfaced almost immediately, placing the same people together at the same location, while the messages claimed separation. The contradiction was undeniable. An alibi constructed too carefully often reveals more than it conceals. Another figure, the owner of the apartment where the incident occurred, chose absence over explanation. After the official conclusion was announced, his public presence ceased entirely. Accounts went dormant, Statements were never issued. In investigations, disappearance is not proof of guilt, but it is rarely a sign of innocence. As speculation intensified, a new channel of information appeared beyond domestic platforms. An anonymous account on an international network began releasing private photographs, family images, moments never shared publicly. The authenticity was difficult to dispute. Only someone close would have access to such material. The account claimed to speak on behalf of the family. It alleged that every attempt by relatives to seek answers had been blocked, posts deleted, appeals ignored, communication restricted. The family, it said, was being isolated from public discourse surrounding the death of their own son. The implication was severe. This was not merely narrative control. It was containment. Then the scope widened. Online investigators began examining corporate records connected to his management history. What emerged was not a single company, but a web. Multiple entities, overlapping directorships. Names that appeared across unrelated filings. Some of those filings listed industries far removed from entertainment. Equipment procurement, security-related services, transactions that raised questions no one wanted asked. More troubling still was the financial backbone supporting the network. Public records indicated that major investment had originated from funds tied to social welfare programs, pension allocations, public security reserves. Capital meant to protect citizens in retirement now flowed through opaque media structures. The implication was staggering. Entertainment, with its complex contracts and fluctuating valuations, is an ideal laundering mechanism. Money enters visible channels, circulates through intangible assets, and exits cleansed. If this system was compromised, then the death was not an isolated event. It was collateral. As discussion edged toward this territory, the response arrived. 3 individuals were detained for allegedly spreading false information. Their offenses were not violence, not extortion. They had questioned the narrative. The arrests were public, their purpose unmistakable. The message was simple. Conversation itself had become dangerous. To redirect attention, unrelated scandals erupted across media feeds. Leaked recordings, celebrity controversies, international incidents. Each headline larger than the last. Each one safely distant from the original question. Who died? And why? Then, unexpectedly, a voice emerged from within the system. A young former serviceman with generational ties to the military posted a call for accountability. He did not speak as an activist. He spoke as a veteran. He asked others like him to demand transparency, to protect the integrity of institutions they had once served. His position offered temporary protection. It did not last. He was not arrested. He was monitored. For days, his movements were tracked. His communications restricted. When he reappeared, his message had changed. Silence replaced resolve. His digital presence was permanently removed, under the pretext of identity verification. The lesson was unmistakable. When inquiry approaches money, power, and institutional legitimacy, it is no longer tolerated. At that depth, truth itself becomes a liability. At this point, the question is no longer who fell. It is who decided the fall would be the end of the story. A detail erased. A conclusion delivered in 12 hours. Witnesses silenced. Physical evidence altered, replaced, or destroyed. A body cremated before it could testify. Audio that suggested fear rather than resignation. Timelines rewritten. Conversations made dangerous. Each act viewed alone might be explained away. Together they form a pattern that resists coincidence. This was not the collapse of an individual. It was the compression of a system under pressure. Throughout this case, the official response did not center on clarification. It centered on closure. Speed replaced diligence. Authority replaced transparency. The mechanisms designed to investigate, instead, moved to contain. When containment failed, distraction followed. When distraction failed, intimidation arrived. What remained was absence. The absence of a forensic report made public. The absence of witnesses willing to speak. The absence of digital records that once existed. The absence of a family's voice in the discussion of their own loss. In the vacuum created by these absences, the public did what institutions would not. It remembered. It archived. It cross-referenced. It listened carefully to fragments others dismissed. It noticed what was removed, not only what was said. This persistence changed the nature of the case. It no longer belonged to investigators who refused to investigate. It belonged to collective memory, to those who understood that silence is not neutral, that forgetting is a decision, and that when truth becomes dangerous, remembering becomes an act of resistance. There may never be a courtroom reckoning, no public trial, no confession that satisfies every doubt. Systems designed to protect themselves rarely indict their own foundations. But exposure does not require permission, and accountability does not always arrive in legal form. Sometimes it arrives as refusal. Refusal to accept a narrative that cannot withstand scrutiny. Refusal to move on when questions remain unanswered. Refusal to allow erasure to succeed. This case was meant to end quickly. It was meant to be reduced to a footnote. Instead, it became a mirror. One that reflected how power behaves when challenged, how institutions react when threatened, and how fragile truth becomes when it approaches money and authority. The story remains unfinished, not because the facts are unknowable, but because they are inconvenient. And so the words continue to circulate, passed quietly between strangers who understand what they mean. The truth is not out. We do not disperse. The case has not ended. It is only waiting for the moment when the truth can no longer be erased.